channel. Welcome everybody. My name is Alec Harris. It's an incredible pleasure to welcome this amazing team from Westminster Choir College, which has really done so much learning over this course of this past semester about how to teach choral music in a distance environment. We're eager to learn the incredible insights and things that they want to share with us. We will be posting into the chat a couple of things. First, a link to a handout, and also Dr. Jordan, his book, Inside the Choral Rehearsal. If you go to our website with the coupon code INSIDE, you will get a 20% discount on his book, Inside the Choral Rehearsal. I'm going to get out of the way as quickly as possible and turn it over to this amazing team led by James Jordan, who's written innumerable books published by GIA and also many, many recordings, and this amazing team of folks from Westminster Choir College. So thank you so much. And Jim, over to you.
Well, thank you, Alec. This is something I've thought about doing, and finally, I think we all had enough guts to actually do it and share. But the reason I'm doing it is because we're all on a learning curve, and I don't think any one of us has any answers, but I can tell you that I must say that I adore my colleagues here and certainly adore my students. And we've all been working very hard with our respective choirs. I want to do a quick introduction for those of you who may not know folks. Let me start from where things are on my screen. Sean McCarther is Associate Professor of Voice here. He also is one of our voice scientists, which I know will scare all of you. And you should be very scared. But Sean has been one of my colleagues that I've been trying to kind of learn from him things I never was taught. So welcome, Sean. Corey Everly is finishing his doctorate at Northwestern University with Don O'Malley. Actually, Corey has endured me. We did the math, and it's 10 years we've worked together. He is my associate conductor and artistic director in the same stream, and he's their vocal coach, and he has a degree in accompanying and coaching from Westminster Choir College, and also a degree in voice performance. Dr. Steve Pilkington, and we go back many years here. I have 1 year over Steve. Steve is in the sacred music department. He conducts symphonic choir this year. He is also my esteemed colleague at the Choral Institute at Oxford. Tom Shelton, you may know because he survived being president of ACDA. And Tom is in sacred music and again, a member of, again, the conducting and sacred music faculty here. Dr. Jason Vodicka is Associate Professor of Music Education at Westminster Choir College. Jason and I have kind of done some books together. Jason is kind of my pedagogical guidepost, and truth be told, a lot of this procedure came from me rethinking a teacher-based model to a student-based model. And he has some things. He has chapel choir here. Tom Shelton conducts the women's choir, Williams and Voices Women's Choir. And to complete the introductions, Elizabeth Reyna is a second-year graduate student in choral conducting. She is GA for not only chapel choir, but also assists Dr. Pilkington. Miggy Arcangel, who is in the Philippines. Miggy is my GA, thank goodness, praise, praise, praise. And he's incredible. He's a second-year conducting major. And then I have two students from Williamson Voices who have had to endure this, Nicole Page and Palmer Hafner. And so they will speak to you later. If I can just get started just talking to you about how this came to be. First of all, there is nothing new that I have not written about, which is a good thing. So in the back of the handout, you see all the books that this is drawn from. But I had an almost close to it, I'm exaggerating, a nervous breakdown in August thinking, how am I gonna do a choir virtually? And once I calmed down and got my breath, it seemed to me that I needed to pay attention to Ed Gordon and music learning theory. I needed to pay attention to vocal technique. And this was actually spawned partially by a question my colleague Steve Pilkington asked me. And he said, how can you build a choral sound virtually? And I'm here to tell you that I believe you can. The process that is on the handout, the 20-page handout, gives you what the choir looks at. It tells you exactly the steps. So I'm not going to walk you through the steps. I'm going to walk you through the big picture right now. Some of the fine points Dr. McCarther will talk to you about. And I apologize because I have my notes made because I don't want to get off track. Let me, because our time is short, let me be very specific. One of the things I think I've realized in this rehearsal process is that we don't rehearse efficiently. None of us do. I think when we have live sound, we try to take the quickest exit to get to the performance, and we bypass some important things in music learning, which one can argue one catches up on, okay? First of all, the first thing I want to say is that since they can't sing together, what is it we can teach? Well, let me tell you, I think music learning process needs to drill down, and in truth, I'm not so sure that when I go back to live teaching, that I'm not going to incorporate some of the things I've just learned in terms of self-evaluation. This process has put more responsibility on individual singers and self-monitoring of one's own voice. So that's the first thing. So thinking about audiation, one of the things that I don't think we spend enough time on because we are in a rush to hear sound is teaching our students to listen and audiate. So built into this process is a very careful sequence where the students just listen to not only the recording that I choose, not to copy the recording, but just to listen to it. And second of all, I could not do this procedure, lack of a better term, without Matthew Curtis's choral tracks. If you don't know these have been a godsend. So the student can hear all parts, they can extract their part, they can do their exams with that part, and Matthew is an extraordinary, extraordinary musician. So this has helped the music learning process. The other third principle I want to tell you that this whole principle relies on, which I preach to my students, choirs must learn in context. That means every student singing has to sing with the other parts all the time. This was a big thing with learning theory. Why Ed Gordon said, we learn by patterns, not by intervals. So if you believe that, then how do you learn in context when there ain't no choir around? Well, it's choral tracks is what it is. And so that they're learning their part, always hearing the other parts. Now, the only difference in the paradigm is, if you notice, I have my choir break out in sectionals. They work by section. Obviously, I'm in a college situation. If you're teaching a church choir or you're in a public school, you may have to come up with something either where you work with the section individually or you work with the whole choir. But there's also lots of resources that we're going to share with you tonight that I'm very excited about, and I think that can supplement this. So first of all, can I just start off by saying that I think the sequence that we have here is for all intents and purposes right. I don't think it goes too fast and I don't think it goes too slow, but I can tell you that my students have been determining the speed at which they move through the process, both in learning and in testing. Every piece usually has 2 tests. And so Miggy will be able to tell you a little bit about that in a little bit. So let's talk about first, what do the students see? Miggy, it's time for you to make an appearance. Miggy, will you, I know we all say we should mark the score and we should give our students the score, but virtually I have had just this cathartic moment where I realized that I never really I wasted a lot of rehearsal time telling students things. Now, please don't shriek when you see this score, Miggy will explain to you, first of all, before you see it, we are using the Margaret Hillis coloration system for the scores. So that pianos are marked in one color, mezzo fortes are in another, and every student gets a PDF that I and Miggy have marked. We also put in harmonic immersion solfege, which is basically my system where I keep everything in major. That's all detailed in, if you're interested, but just trust me, it's in here. And then Miggy goes in and does other stuff. Miggy, put the score up so they can see it. This is in your handout, by the way. So Miggy, explain to them what you mark.
Hi, everyone. So basically what I mark is in addition to all of the colored things that the conductor, Dr. Jordan, puts in to highlight the elements in the music, I go in and mark the doublings of the chord. So we look at each chord vertically and identify where are the doubled notes, particularly the roots and the fifths. So we associate a certain shape to each of those, maybe a circle for the roots and a square for the fifths. And if there are other doubled notes, we use other shapes of how they contribute to the sonority of the chord and helps them tune, and develops greater sensitivity basically in their process of learning. In addition, I also mark in all of the dissonances. So those are all mapped out with a straight line, as you can see on the score. I like to use red so it's more compelling to the eye. Dissonances that are spaced out over an octave are very important to point out so that students know where the points of tension and resolution are, because these will guide their sense of phrase and harmonic structure. I also put in all of the solfege syllables, and you'll notice that we might be using a very specific kind of solfege system that puts everything in major. So we'd like everyone to think and associate the intervals that they see in major mode, which is going to be easier to tune. So all of the details for more visual learning and for the students to be able to really see what the conductor and the choir intends, even if they are in the silence of their own homes rehearsing the score.
Thank you. Now, the other thing I want to point out to you very quickly is that one of the premises of a music learning theory, I see Carolyn Cruz is on here and some of my other learning theory advocates. Oral. What I did in this process, oral is where you listen to music first and then you sing it. You must do the oral first. So the process is broken down into oral, and then when they do start singing, it is very controlled. So I want to move to Corey Everly right now, and I want Corey to tell you, and again, this is something that I've watched Corey do for me, and I've kind of done it, but he's kind of brought it in line with voice science, and that's basically we give them instructions on how each vowel is made with the tongue, and also how they're to learn it on a neutral syllable, and we only allow them one neutral syllable. So Corey, would you like to explain that quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi to everyone at home. We have lots of great information in store for you, so I want to cut right to it. I'll share with you on page 11. I see that there are still some people having trouble accessing, so I'll just go ahead and share so that you can see. But on page 11 of the guide here, there's an MRI of the correct tongue posture for the mixed vowel, and the whole point of the Swedish mixed vowel is to get all of the wonderful benefits of the E-vowel, right, which is that the tongue is fronted, as you can see here. And what I mean by that is that it's relatively front in the mouth and it opens up the space behind the tongue, okay? And I wish we had time to go into the to all the varied explanations of why that's a good thing, but there is gold to be mined back here in terms of resonances, formants, things like that. And so it's very important that the tongue is always fronted, as you see here in this picture of the MRI. And the other benefit of the Swedish mixed vowel is that as opposed to a tight-lipped U vowel in terms of a mixed vowel, the Swedish mixed vowel uses an O position in the front of the mouth. So having an O position in the front with the E tongue position reinforces a little bit more, a little bit more width in the pharynx, a little bit more shape that's not quite so constricted. The problem, of course, with the mixed U vowel is that it can really tighten the lips, and we know that if the lips are tight, the throat will be tight. So that's the whole point of using the Swedish mixed vowel, is to achieve sort of that brightness in the tone from the E vowel, the darkness and balance, reinforcing of the pharynx, and the deeper sensation of the O vowel. And so it's a way of achieving optimal resonance, but it's also a way to sort of help build the music into the voice. Yeah.
Exactly. I think for now, that's probably enough information for us, but let me just, can I give you all a spoiler alert? You might be asking, okay, so did you ever hear the choir? Do you know this works? I'm gonna let Palmer and NP talk about this at the end. We only met once to do a socially distanced recording for our holiday program. The sound was amazing. The notes were in place. I was thrilled. Also thinking, how much time have I wasted in rehearsal? This was so efficient. How much more could I have gotten done? So Dr. McCarther, it's your turn. I'm batting it over to you.
Hi, everybody. Let me get my screen going now. Over there, optimize, and okay. So I've been working with Dr. Jordan for the past 5 or 6 years on trying to find the intersection of voice science and choral pedagogy, to find where I come from as an applied voice teacher and how I can help my students sing with their voices, but in service to the greater good that we all love in choral singing. And when Dr. Jordan started thinking about how he was going to do this, he asked my thoughts on, well, what am I doing in the voice studio? And of course, teaching voice online is tricky. There's obviously some good benefits about having Zoom voice lessons, and that I can have my lessons with students anywhere, but I'm not in the room. And at least in a one-on-one session, I can hear my students. If you're directing choirs, you're probably having them all on mute, and so you can't even actually hear the sound that they're making. And so if we're not in the room and you can't hear them, how do we provide them feedback? At college, we have the benefit that they do have a one-on-one voice lesson, but if you're a high school director, or if you're a choral director, or if you're dealing with an amateur choir, you probably are their voice teacher. And so part of your responsibility is not only to get them to learn pitches and rhythms, but to do so with a healthy vocal technique. So for the past 8 or 9 years, one of my research interests has been the acquisition of expertise and motor learning specifically. What is the process by which the brain learns to do any kind of motor task, especially the fine motor and unconscious tasks of singing? And one of the things that the literature on motor learning suggests is important for all motor tasks is that as teachers, we help the students become independent, that they become able to self-diagnose and self-correct on their own. That actually speeds up their learning process. And so for me, moving over to online, just re-emphasize the fact that I need to remove myself from the process. But still, they need some kind of feedback, especially if they aren't getting weekly voice lessons. And so we need to give them skills and techniques to self-assess, diagnose, and correct problems on their own. And so there's a couple of things that we can do that. I'm going to talk about 2 of them specifically tonight. And the first one is focus. The literature on focus and attention from psychologists all kind of say that we have a finite amount of computational power. Our brain can literally only do so much at one time. So if we have a limited amount, where we put that attention is vitally important to many, many aspects of our lives. But as teachers in particular, we need to help our students learn what to focus on. Now, the precursor to all that is that we need to know what they need to focus on. And that means we need to have a basic understanding of how the voice works, and we need to be able to look at a piece of music and be able to determine what is possibly going to be problematic. Are the sopranos having to maintain a particularly high tessitura? Are we dealing with changing voices? How is that going to manifest? And so we need to understand what the vocal challenges of the repertoire might be before we start working on that repertoire. When we start to teach, and more importantly, when somebody begins to learn, the only way that you can take in information is with our five senses. And so as we begin to develop our process for teaching people vocally in a remote environment in particular, we need to figure out ways to help them learn to engage their five senses. This brings us to the second major component, and that is feedback. We aren't in the room. And since we're not in the room, we have to help them learn how to have feedback. And we do this again by engaging the five senses. One of the things that we can do if we again know specifically the kind of vocal technique that we're trying to impart is that we can try to design exercises or ways to learn music that fix problems implicitly. And by that, I mean that just the very nature of the pitch pattern, the specific vowel, the consonants, the dynamics, and the way we present the information begins to address particular vocal issues. And then once we've done that, we need to direct our students' attention to the specific feedback that's going to help encode that particular behavior into learning. Now, that was a lot of information thrown at you very, very quickly. The best way to learn anything is by doing. And so what I want to do now is some examples. For instance, let's say you have to teach inhalation to your choir. Just because you know what something is supposed to do does not mean you necessarily know how to do it. And so when I'm working with new students, I like to get them to explore what their body's going to do. For inhalation in particular, we're all different. We're all going to breathe differently. So this is the game that I typically will play with my students. And I've worked on this in group environments as well. I want you to take your thumbs. Any place between your sternum and your pelvis, all the way around is fair game. You're just going to take your thumbs and you're going to place it on a part of your body. And then you're just going to take a nice, easy breath in and see if you can allow that part of your body to expand. Great. Now find a different spot. Can be in the very back, can be in the front, and just see if you can allow that part of your body to expand. We have levels. You can have one thumb high and one thumb low. Can you get those two parts of the body to expand? And when working with my students, both new students and students that I've been working with for a long time, we just explore various aspects of the way the body can move. And in this way, the students can start to gain more conscious control over what their body is doing. So this is engaging touch, right? Ways that we can engage sight. They're all on Zoom. They can just hit the button and make their picture big. And if they're not on Zoom, they've probably got one of these handy, right? They can just take a video of themselves. And we're literally asking them to watch what's expanding. We're asking them to watch what's not expanding. So this is a way to get them to have a more exploratory way of learning to inhale. On the flip side, let's talk about how air gets out of the body with lip trills. Most people do lip trills, and lip trills are fantastic for figuring out how air flows out of the body. But you need to remember that anytime you give a cue or an exercise or an image or a metaphor to your students, somebody's going to misunderstand it. And anything you say may fix 10 things, and one other thing may go the opposite direction. For some reason, lip trills tend to make the back of the throat want to collapse. And so knowing this, we can give cues and give focus points to our students to help fix that. So a very simple lip trill exercise might be just a nice 5-tone scale. Where am I going to ask my students to put their attention? Well, first off, I've just done the exploratory inhalation, so I'm going to ask them to feel for some part of their body to expand low, right? That engages touch. If I'm really making certain that the air is going to flow, I can have them put their hand in front of their face and feel for the air on their hands. If they have tissues nearby or pieces of paper, they can dangle that in front of their face and they can literally watch the tissue vibrate in the air. I can ask for them to feel for the buzz of the lips. I can ask them to hear for the buzz of the lips. This all begins to help isolate and focus their attention on specific feedback It gives the body the information that it needs to know. Implicitly, just by doing that, they begin to learn how to regulate their airflow. The other thing, in the lip trill, the back of the throat wants to collapse. And so I oftentimes will ask my students to think about what is the vowel behind the lip trill. So instead of, which is, I'll ask them to go, which would be, ah. And you can have them consciously go back and forth between them. Make the tight sound. Now make the other sound. By doing this, we begin to help them figure out a way to self-assess. And in your rehearsals, you can say, great, we're going to work on lip trills. Remember to listen to the vowel behind the lip trill. If you're concerned about airflow, remember to feel the air on your hands. The same kind of thing can work for other exercises. I'm a big fan of straws right now. I have these wonderful little metal straws that one of my students bought for me. Most people have access to straws. If not, singing on a V or singing on a TH can be fantastic for helping students learn how to regulate breath pressure and breath flow. Unfortunately, in the time that I have tonight, I can't go over a whole lot. But the main thing is that when you're directing your students to develop technique, you need to focus them on a particular aspect of that technique. And in particular, that needs to be very sensory-oriented feedback. I'm going to throw a couple of links in the chat. I've created, I think, 8 videos that discuss alignment, discuss inhalation, opening up with the throat, breath pressure, breath flow, a little bit about resonance as well, with some more specific ideas on how to incorporate this into your choral rehearsals. I'm going to throw that link in the chat. I'm also on Tuesday actually presenting for the Pennsylvania Music Educators Association on this specific topic as it relates to choirs. Westminster also has a webinar series that we're going to be launching in December. The dates haven't quite been finalized on that, but this, among topics like working with transgender voices, relating STEM into your choral classrooms, are all going to be offered as a service to particularly those of you in the high school and middle school for professional development. If you have any specific questions for me, you can shoot me a chat right now and I'm happy to answer them. And I will turn it back over to Dr. Jordan.
Thank you. And again, Dr. McCarther advised me, you will see in the guide, by the way, some of you are writing that you can't see the guide. I'll leave that to Alec Harris, but it will be all mailed to you also. I want to switch, again, I'm moving quickly and I apologize, but I just want to give you the best overview possible. I'm going to go back to Corey now, briefly, and we are going to talk about how we teach. It appeared to me that normally in a rehearsal, what you do is you hear them sing, and then when you hear things that don't mesh up in terms of blend, you go and you fix vowels. Well, I started actually 3 years ago by making sure my warm-ups incorporated the best tongue positions for each vowel and that they understood the inner architecture. For me, it's only reinforcing what my brilliant voice colleagues do. But I do need to reinforce it. So Corey, can you drag them through these very quickly? But it's all about the tongue, as Lindsay Christensen used to say. It's all about the tongue, folks. I wrote for years about the lips. It ain't about the lips initially. Go.
Yeah, it's great. I'm going to run you guys through this quickly. As Dr. Jordan mentioned, the tongue is the most important part, though there are a lot of other important parts. Generally, the tongue is responsible for the most that can go wrong. So that's why it's important to diagnose. And the choral Band-Aid for years and years and years on that was just around the lips, which gets you a result. And it gets you a quick result. It unifies everything quickly. And particularly if you're in a room of singers where everyone's listening to each other, they can quickly kind of adjust. And that's sort of a voice teacher's worst nightmare, actually. So, and actually one of the benefits, we spend a lot of time maybe bemoaning the virtual rehearsal, but one of the benefits of the virtual rehearsal is that they're not going to go with the person next to them, right? But in order to still have a blend, right, or create a choral sound when we come back together, we have to think about how we can teach them these vowel postures, as I've sort of come on to calling them. So I typically throw out this question about how the oo vowel is made, and I typically get a comment about how the tongue is flat, because for some reason, at some point in the pedagogy, people started talking about the oo feeling like a round space in the mouth, and rounding lips. And they've neglected to realize what actually goes on physiologically with the tongue. So this is actually an MRI video of the tongue. And what's interesting about this, as you'll see, is that the tongue is actually quite high on the back on oo. And that is because oo is a back closed vowel. Back and closed meaning that the closure happens in the back of the mouth, and the space being closed is between the tongue and the soft palate. Okay, so that has nothing to do with how open or closed your mouth is, which I think is also a common misconception when we begin to talk about open and closed vowels. So here on the MRI video, you'll see an oo. Sorry, I'm going to share with sound. I'll play it a couple of times. Again, pay attention to the space behind the tongue, but there, I paused it in mid-action. I practiced a lot to do that. And you see that space behind the tongue. You'll also notice he is laying down in an MRI. So the space in here with the tongue is not as fronted as we may like, but keep in mind he's laying down in an MRI. So he's got that gravity sort of pulling the tongue back a little bit. Even still, amazing, that space there behind the tongue on oo. Would you teach oo first because you go from oo, you can go from oo to o to aw to ah, and that helps you find your ah. I can also give you your dark ahs and father. I can also give you a way to find ah from e in a minute, and that solves a lot of problems for people in terms of having spread vowels that they want to correct, spread ah, this sort of thing. The way that you correct it is really by talking about these internal vowel postures. So I'll go to e really quickly. E. I'll stop it. Oh, that was good. Okay. And you'll see here, there's even more space, of course, behind the tongue. Tongue is more fronted and ideal. Again, E is a front closed vowel. What that means is that the closure is made in the front of the mouth between the tongue and the hard palate this time. So again, that has nothing to do with that has nothing to do with how open or closed the mouth is, things like that, right? Those are all sort of misconceptions. Open and closed refers to the distance of the tongue from the roof of the mouth. So in this case, and something that I do to, after we look at the anatomy drawings is I kind of say, okay, be your teeth, right? Put the hand here, and then I say be your tongue, right? Because the hand actually is really helpful. This can be the back of it, the wrist can be the back, knuckles can be the front of the tongue. And so I have people feel that. So if you'll say E, and then you move down slightly, you're tracing these positions here. You go E, A, Ah. Right there's your brighter ah from the position of E. And so this is a really, really, really great way to teach vowels to your choir because it's fact-based. So it doesn't matter what their prior training is. If they've had a lot of voice training, if they've had no voice training, if they sang for 20 years, if they sang for no years, this information is fact-based, it's universal, it's grounded in voice science, and while it might serve to help kind of a bel canto vocal function, ideally, this is pedagogy that an E is an E is an E. It can be used in any style of music. Of course, there are other recipes we can add on top of these things. But if you're somebody who works in a lot of styles, or somebody who's looking to sort of make things easier for your contemporary music students, make things easier for your early music students, all of that stuff, you start here with this fact-based information and about how the tongue moves.
Yeah, so thank you, Corey. I'm pushing my folks along.
It's good, it's good.
Friends.
That's fine.
But the one thing I want to say is the tie-in is the reason I use that Swedish mixed vowel is because the students learn their music with a high tongue position rather than defaulting to American. I used to rehearse on oo and e. Well, if they don't sing a good oo and they don't sing a good e, you're in trouble. So this is a way around it. And it really does work, but maybe my students want to talk about this. I'm going to move right on. Dr. Vodicka, go.
All right. Give me a moment to share my screen, and I'll jump right in. All right. So Dr. Jordan asked me to talk about movement and using movement in the virtual rehearsal and the role of improvisation in the choral rehearsal, particularly how to do that virtually. So moving right in to looking at this idea of movement. One of the ways that I have found that it's really great to use movement in choral rehearsals is during the choral warm-up. And I always use gestures during the warm-ups that I do with my singers. But I found that as I was sitting on Zoom and watching all of their little boxes, leading warm-ups, not able to hear anything, I could actually tell a lot about what was going on by the quality of their gestures and their level of participation, their level of commitment. Also, I started to notice that I could understand sort of what was going on in their heads as far as their conception of vocal technique by the way that they were mimicking the gestures that I was showing them. So this example here, oh moon, this is one I typically teach first on a lip trill. And so I would have the students sort of move their fingers around like this. I'm sure you've done this before. And even though I couldn't hear the singers singing back, I could tell by the placement of where they put the fingers in front of their body, by the rate at which they moved their fingers, a lot about what was going on with their breath. So I encourage you to think about using the gestures as a way of assessing. So again, assessing the quality of a given gesture is going to tell you something about what's going on the other end of the screen. Another way to use gesture is to simply ask the students, okay, now that we've added in this gesture, what changed about the sound for you? And you can give students the opportunity to put that in the chat feature, or you can give them the opportunity or call on them to explain to you what changed when they added that gesture. And that gets some conversation going and provides a little bit of explanation. I often ask singers to create their own gestures as well, just to reinforce good singing. So to use that oh moon example, I might say, do something with your hands that shows me your understanding of placement. And so if I see singers going up here, oh moon, or coming here, oh moon, I can't hear them, but I can tell from what they're doing something about what the sound is sounding like on the other side. And of course, you can always ask individual singers to demonstrate for the full ensemble or for a small group. This is easier with a group that you feel comfortable with. I always ask for volunteers for this, obviously, at the beginning especially. The other way I've been using movement is to use Laban movement analysis. Dr. Jordan has written extensively on the use of Laban for teaching conducting. I have found that the 8 different gestures in combination, efforts in combination, are really helpful when figuring out things like phrasing and articulation. So the example here is a Gloria by Haydn. And I might start with my students by telling them that I think the first measure is all dabbing. So if you take your hand like you have a tiny paintbrush and you're just going to dab, we would sing Gloria in excelsis. Then when we get to Deo, I might just say to them, to me that feels like a glide. Deo. So together we would, Gloria in excelsis Deo, which then sets them up to start making their own decisions about which of these gestures work with the piece. I could have all of them muted on the computer and ask them to just gesture this next section for me. And that would give me a lot of information about what's going on with their own interpretation. It also would give me some really interesting musical ideas that I might want to try myself, or that I might want to call attention to. I might say, for example, everybody pay attention to Angie because she has a really interesting interpretation. Then we can all try Angie's gesture And we've increased our articulation vocabulary and our phrasing vocabulary beyond just staccato and legato. So look into those Laban effort choices. They've been super helpful. Improvisation, a little bit on improvisation. Number one, why improvisation? Choirs typically don't improvise, right? Well, I am convinced that improvisation is the missing link for music literacy. The pictures here, I show, an older person reading to two younger people, ostensibly teaching them how to read. The only reason they're prepared to read is because they have engaged in conversation with adults, with other children, and that prepares them for that step of reading. So in music, improvisation is our conversation. And I think it's super important for filling in that missing link for reading. The text that I've been using this semester online is the Azera and Bruno Developing Musicianship Through Improvisation series. I have Motherless Child up here for you to just show you some of the techniques that they use. This series is available from GIA, of course, and comes with CDs. So it's been very easy for me to just hit play on my iTunes, and then it comes through, and the students are all able to do this at home on their own. In this series, you learn to improvise based on a known song. So you would learn Motherless Child and sing it through several times. Again, thinking and learning orally first. The book also provides rhythm patterns and tonal patterns that you first learn to sing by repeating, again, oral, and then labeling with solfege, and finally with improvising. So for example, to use the tonal patterns, once we've moved through the series a bit, the students might hear dum bum bum, and then they would have to sing back something different but similar. Bum bum bum. And so I found this to be incredibly helpful for the students. I found this to be incredibly helpful for my own improvisation training. We have a new pipe organ on campus that I sat down to play the other day, and I started improvising, and Dr. Vodicka does not improvise, but I found myself actually being able to create music. It was a really revealing moment to myself that it was working for me as a keyboardist, and so how much more would it be working for my students who are vocalists? The last thing I have to share with you is another way of thinking about improvisation. And this can be done with choirs of any levels, and it can be done all over Zoom. This is a technique that we learned from Andre de Quadros, who was on campus doing a residency on campus in Zoom with us for the past month. He gave the students each this prompt and divided them into small groups. They were to use the sung phrase, distant but together, some sort of repetitive rhythmic sound, the color black, a moment where no one is heard, a moment of tension, repeating gestures, call and response, unique camera depth and angle, and he gave them 7 minutes to create a Zoom piece of art using this prompt. And so I want to share with you just one or two of the results that the students came up with. Some of it's musical improvisation. Other of it is not strictly musical improvisation, but it is artistic improvisation and creation. And again, I think that's incredibly important. So I'll share with you now one example from Chapel Choir.
In and out, but this is our group. This is what our group looks like, okay?
That's fine.
All right. Dum dum da da dum dum da da dum da da dum dum da dum da da dum da da dum
We do be together though.
Together distant all but together distant, but together, but together.
So I think you can see they were enjoying themselves there. Again, 7 minutes of prep time. I think it's just helpful to remember that music's not always about singing somebody else's music. Sometimes it's about making your own. And I hope that that's given you some ideas about how to use this Zoom platform to create something kind of cool and improvisatory. Thanks, Dr. Jordan.
You're welcome. So I want to just mention briefly because it is on, I wrote in the chat. One of the things I think has to happen, and I'm going to kind of take some of Corey's thunder away because I'm trying to save time. But I think on Zoom, because there's no sound, it is an opportunity for your singers to sensitize themselves to your gesture. So in other words, what I try to do is a breath impulse gesture, relays certain information, and then how I use and cover the horizontal beat is giving them information on how they use air. I think so much of it, sometimes they don't pick up on that information because they're responding to people in the room. But this has been an opportunity. I have rehearsals where sound is off. We haven't had that many, but where sound is off, and I'm just conducting. Now, let me just tell you another thing that is vitally important that I didn't realize till late. My accompanist, Greg Stout, I brought him in just a couple weeks ago, and we outfitted a room that was big enough for social distancing with a microphone so that the choir could clearly hear him. And I conducted and he played, and they obviously were on mute, but sang. Singers told me the fact that he and I were making music together made them connected in. And I think that's something that you should not underestimate. But how we breathe, we can teach virtually, and how, so that not every breath, because when you do this, to paraphrase Corey, you know, if you're doing that, you're wasting a lot of air. I take particular care on what happens on the horizontal so that we don't have this kind of waste of air and more sensitivity to how the singers are doing their thing. I want to talk about, well, first of all, Tom, it's your turn. Tom Shelton, Professor Shelton.
Hi.
Share
Okay. Here we go. Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you all tonight. I came to Dr. Jordan and said, I think what I should talk about is working with children's and youth choirs, because I feel like there are a lot of you, there may be children's choir people out here that may need some more information. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And these are just some things that have been very helpful for me going through slideshow. Okay, so parameters are really important for children and youth. So at the very beginning, I went over specific parameters for them for every rehearsal. If they were coming to meet with me, these are things that they would need to do. So now that they're doing it at home, we need to set up an environment that's going to work. So location with minimal distractions. And I'm going to fly through these and I'll send them to you if you're interested. Refrain from using other devices. Acceptable behavior. Rename yourself. When you have 50-some people, I have one choir with 53, and I will have to tell them all the time to rename themselves. So if I can get that ingrained in their head from day one, that's important. Keep your video on. A lot of them will turn their video off, but I have to be able to see what they're doing and assess what they're doing. So keeping your video on is really important in terms of participation. Dress appropriately. A lot of them get really comfortable at home. Dress appropriately. Mute your microphone when you're not speaking. Don't use the chat unless I'm prompting you with a question, and then close all unnecessary tabs so that you have better connectivity. I'll also give them this best audio settings for music, because we're already at a disadvantage trying to have a choral rehearsal online virtually when they have to sing on mute, basically. So I want whatever we're doing to be the best that they can do musically. So I send them these audio settings as well. Okay, so this is the most important thing for me, is the human factor. And you know, choir is a community, but it's really the interactions that you have with the individuals, the connection that you have. So we're dealing with so many things right now with this pandemic. Mental health is a real issue for a lot of people. So individual check-ins, when they're signing on, I ask every single person how they're doing. I might have a question or a prompt every rehearsal. What is something you're really excited about? What's the best thing that happened to you this week? Just so that we have an interaction with each individual. And you know, community music is our vessel for connection with others. I think that's really, but the human connection and the human factor is so important. Okay, so these are some, in terms of planning rehearsals, having a variety of music learning activities is very important. So I might do warm-ups, singing anthems and octavos. I always do individual singing. I do this even live, meaning I will ask for examples. They all raise their hand. I will go to one of the boxes, or I'll say, please unmute yourself, Anna, and sing the example. If I'm doing warm-ups, I will lead the warm-up, but I'll immediately ask one of them to sing. And individual singing is important because it gives you so much assessment. You're assessing their vocal technique. You're assessing whether they have the correct pitch, rhythm, the phrasing, the musicality, all of these things. And you can get that from a 4-second example of them singing. I do lots of things with solfege patterns, well, where I might not make any sound, but I might just sign it and I'll say, who can sing that for me? And they'll volunteer and I'll call on them and they have that opportunity. The chat function is also a really great assessment tool. If you ask them certain questions during rehearsal and they post it all in the chat. You know, I will say the hardest part is the organization. It takes me 3 times the amount of actual physical time planning an online virtual rehearsal than if I was actually going to lead the rehearsal. And keeping the pace of the rehearsal online requires great organization. I may have 18 windows before I start my rehearsal because I might have 4 pieces I'm using. I'll have recordings of those pieces. I'll have accompaniments for those pieces. I will have different musical examples. I might have videos that I'm using that relate to what we're talking about that day. And then with children, I've been using Kahoot at the very end because number one, they love it, but it's also a very good assessment tool. And there's just some information about Kahoot if you're interested. I know I went through this really fast because we have so many people. So here's my email. If you have any questions, just please send me an email.
And I'll give you Tom Shelton's home address and his personal phone number. Tom, no, thank you. Again, we're just throwing out, you know, ideas. Maybe we need to do another drilling down at some point, but there's so much that I see my colleagues doing that I wanted to share it. Miggy, well, first of all, I'm sorry, not Miggy, you're not yet. Dr. Pilkington, let me just say that Steve the thing that made me start thinking that something is possible musically is by watching the videos that he had to do for his church in New York, which kind of blew my mind because they were musical experiences and human experiences. And our Christmas program that will go online, I think December 13th, it uses all of these. So Steve, if you could talk a little bit about that and the thing, your kind of insight into any of this that you can give us.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. And for people like Miggy in the Philippines, good morning. Nice to have you all here. I just want to take just a quick swerve away towards the long view, which sometimes I think is hard for us to grasp in these complicated, upsetting times, and move us away from science and pedagogy and into the world of imagination and inspiration. And not that science and pedagogy are mutually exclusive of that, of course, but it's a lot of data for us to absorb. So I was on my computer the other night thinking about this, and of course it's hard not to find a screen that doesn't have a top bar or a sidebar with some kind of advertisement. And the one that caught my attention was from the world of appliance advertising. How exciting is that? But the taglines caught my attention. We are redefining the world of luxury appliances. And I thought, well, thank heavens, because I'm worried about the mundane appliances in my own apartment. But I what I want to say to you is we are redefining the world of choral music. And I think during this time, while we're trying to figure out our virtual world, we can't have this mindset that says, well, I can't wait to go back to the way things were, as opposed to I can't wait to move forward with all this new information. And of course, we're living in a culture that is rebirthing itself. And so how are we going to lead out as choral musicians in this rebirthing time? And so the tagline at the bottom of this appliance ad was elevate everything. And I thought that's so beautiful, just 2 words. And that's what we need to do, elevate everything. And so everything that's been said tonight elevates us as musicians, as teachers, understanding voice, understanding gesture, breath, vowels, all these things. And I don't know about you, but especially during the lockdown early in the pandemic here in New York City, it sort of turned into a kind of sabbatical for me, even though March and April, I was still beginning my journey with the University of Zoom. But I had a lot of free time. And I found in my own complicated life of a New York church job and teaching in Princeton and the back and forth and all this for a quarter of a century, I suddenly had time to breathe. So I started doing deep dives into Spotify, for example, or Apple Music, and just listening deeply and broadly. And I'm embarrassed to say I was astonished at all the musics and even choral ensembles that I'd never had the time to really experience in a more substantial way. You know, Dr. J here on the screen, his incredible library of books. This is a great time to deep dive when we do have some space. You know, instead of binging on Netflix, limit yourself and binge on, say, Jim's book output, or a composer you love, or a choir you've discovered, and explore deeply. And I know paradoxically, I want to say to you, I think it's probably going to be true for all of us. I know I'm going to be a better musician and a better teacher and a better conductor because of the pandemic. Isn't that an irony? So I do look forward to being through the gate so I can elevate everything I do, including how I program a concert, as well as how I inspire my students, my singers, and perhaps most importantly in our new world, how do I elevate our audiences and bring them along into this incredible new century that we are birthing.
Thank you, Steve. And I would advise you to watch our virtual Christmas program, either on the date it's aired or when it's archived, because that process and how that's put together, and many of the ideas are Steve's. Right now, I want to go very quickly. Miggy, it is in the guide, but can you tell them briefly what, part of this is that the students had to upload them singing with the choral tracks. And actually, Miggy, they had it all figured out. So could you briefly summarize what you told them? Because it is in the guide.
Yeah, so the process of evaluation that we use is very similar to the virtual choir setup that we're used to by now, which makes use of 2 devices, one to record with and one to listen to the track with. So the important thing here is that as people are recording their tests, that the instructions are very clear and mapped out and very specific. So some of the ones that we use, which are in the guide, are, for example, accuracy of pitch, accuracy of rhythm, the phrase of the line, and evenness of registration, which is when we have singers singing in the mixed vowel to see the registration, singing in legato, and specific dictional instructions when you're working with specific texts. All of these have been very helpful for us, especially on the evaluators' end, because I think it's very different than when you're in the regular choral rehearsal, that you're able to hear each one as an individual and you get more used to their timbres and the areas that they need more specific help on. So I think I've gotten to know the students much better through this process of listening to them one by one.
I just put in the chat and I stopped because Miggy turned it over to me. I bring Corey in, we do dictional rehearsals, of which there is one. And frankly, they have been of incredible help. I think to not only me, but to the students. And again, I do use rating scales because I want, and they are in the guide to show you, they're just generic, but to let the students know what we're listening for, which is very, very important. Elizabeth, what have you found working with chapel choir and or symphonic choir that you want to share?
Sure. So as Dr. Jordan just mentioned, I am the GA for 2 choirs. I have chapel choir, which consists of 27 singers, and symphonic choir, which consists of 122, and those ensembles happen to be back to back. So the way that we work with the evaluation process is breaking up students into breakout rooms. And that gives us a chance for Dr. Vodicka and I to float around to the classes or to the rooms to answer any questions they may have, to address certain things that we know they'll need to make sure that they implement into their recordings. And we do 2 separate recordings. We do one on a mixed vowel, which is E through U lips. And then we also give them different things for them to focus on in their recording. So phrasing, breaths, how are they taking their breaths? How is the sound? Are they really focusing on the placement of that tongue? Is it changing? Everything that they're thinking about is implemented into those recordings, and then we give them feedback. Then we go back into our breakout rooms when they come back for the next class. We kind of discuss more into detail as to what the next recording is going to consist of, which is text. And so then we create another assignment box, and we have them upload their files into that, and talking about glottal stops, the phrasing, the text, is everybody agreeing on the vowels? Because of course, in this type of setting, that's the biggest challenge that we face, is making sure the singers are unison with each other, even though we're not together, if we were, in just a regular classroom setup. With symphonic choir being 122, we still break up into sectionals, and we have amazing section leaders. We've even utilized some of our 5th-year master students to help us with that, especially with the treble voices. And we found, asking students, that they really liked the sectional rooms. They said, Dr. Pilkington, we love these rooms because it allows us to really focus on what it is you're asking for us to do and implement it into our assessments. With symphonic choir, we did not do assignment boxes. What we did is we did real-time assessment with feedback. And so that would consist of us choosing a section of the music, saying, you're going to be tested on this. This is what we're looking for. Everybody else would mute, and that singer would then sing their excerpt. We would then give them real-time feedback, because that's something that the singers, the other ones who are about ready to test, can make sure they implement in their tests. And so it's going to differ depending on the size of your ensemble. But if you have those students who know exactly what it is you're looking for, utilize them, use them in your classroom. And then, that was another thing. We're doing a really great project with chapel choir that we can't wait to share with you, that has allowed us to create student teams. So we have a team for artwork, history, composer, lyricist, audio, and visual, because we had students say, oh my gosh, I know how to work with audio. We're like, great. And so those students have been kind of taking that lead and telling the other students, hey, if it's audio, hey, I need you to do this on your recording next time. I need you to fix this. That gives them a chance to step into that leadership role and really set themselves up for higher standards for themselves. That's the other thing about these part recordings, is that students are engaging in self-assessment. They have the ability to listen to themselves sing, evaluate what they hear, and make changes on their own without a teacher giving them that feedback. We're still there to help them, but this is really allowing them to set themselves to a certain standard which then of course they're going to take into their own classrooms in the future as future music educators. And overall, it's just been a great system, and these students have been doing so well, and we are so proud of them. And again, we can't wait for you to see our projects that we've done in this virtual world that we have.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Palmer and NP. So these are two singers in Williamson voices. So they have been through this. I have no idea what they're going to say. And it better be good. But no, I'm only kidding. I think all three of us would I think agree that when we put the choir together, it was astonishingly good, irrespective of something. So NP, do you want to just talk briefly about your reactions to all of this?
Yeah, sure, I would love to. So I was kind of thinking about what I'd like to say, and I was thinking about the year and just like my thoughts kind of coming into the year. And I really expected this year to kind of be like a waiting period, and I thought that I would be regressing in my musicianship skills because I wouldn't be singing in an ensemble. But the kind of nature of having to do this on my own within the sphere of being in the ensemble and with guidance has actually kind of forced me to take ownership of my shortcomings in an ensemble setting. So it's actually given me a lot of agency and furthered my musicianship skills because it places responsibility on me to know every pitch, every rhythm, everything about the music in ways that I might have let myself slide on in an ensemble setting. Like if there was a passage that might be really tricky and I knew the girl next to me really had it down and I was kind of like having a hard time with it, I might let her be the leader there, but I can't do that when I'm recording a part by myself. So everyone really has to step up and be the leader 100%. And I think that is why it sounded so good when we got together, because everyone was 100% prepared. Like it wasn't prepared in the way that we've been preparing for the last however many years. It was 100% prepared, and I just think that that's like, it's a really neat part of it. And Dr. P had said like, we can't just be waiting for things to go back to how they were. And for us, like in school, that's so true, because this is the year that I'm getting my master's degree and the year that I'm doing all of my master's coursework. Like I don't get to redo this next year when the pandemic is done. So I have to keep doing this work regardless of the format. So that's just
NP and Palmer, you can talk about this. All of the students have told me, or some of them, that the choral tracks are really, really helpful. And I must tell all of you that I don't know why I didn't use them before. I didn't know about them, and I thought, well, we're at Westminster Choir College. We don't need things like that. I think the music learning went faster. NP, and then Palmer, you can jump in.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think that just having the isolated part, and especially with Matthew Curtis, you'd think like, oh, maybe like he wouldn't be able to do the soprano or the alto parts like in the tone that we need, but he really accomplishes it very well. And it's really helpful to sing along to, like even for tone and for vowel things, like he really makes it very easy.
It's a library, in case you don't know it, it's a library of 12,000 pieces that he has recorded all the parts. He was a former singer in Chanticleer, and he's amazing. Palmer, talk to us.
I think a dimension that I want to add is kind of the social dimension, because I think an important part of choir is being together, and that's why a lot of people like it. So in the beginning, Dr. Jordan was kind of throwing us into these sectionals, and I felt, well, I act as the tenor section leader in the choir, so I was often thinking about, well, you know, how do I get the people want to do this? Because they're just very disheartened by the fact that we're doing it in a virtual way, and they like being in the room together and singing together, and that's kind of what makes a lot of the experience. So I tried to think about how to really achieve that even in a Zoom room, and I think the sectionals really were an important part of that, because you know, when we're in the call with 60 people, it's really hard. You can't really talk. If people try to talk at the same time, they're kind of overlapping. But just being in that isolation to kind of group together of, tenors are a smaller group, but even 15 people is better than 60. And we could talk to each other. We could talk about the problems that we're having in our singing. And, you know, sometimes we even like sang for each other. And that really helped when we got into person. Because ironically, when we're singing in person, I don't feel like I knew the voices of the section as well. Because when you're doing it over Zoom, I hear each person and I'm like, this is what their voice is like. But, you know, in person, we're kind of all singing together. Maybe I sit a few seats down from them and I don't really hear them. But when we got into person, I was like, oh yeah, I know exactly who that person is, what they're going to sound like, what their problems are in their singing, and maybe how I can help them in that way. And then I even expanded this kind of social thing by motivating them by doing the sectionals, because most of my sectionals, we would do a bunch of work, and then I was like, if we get through this much work, we'll like play among us together as a group over Zoom. And they loved that, and it really worked. And, you know, we had so much fun, and it made us actually a better group because we were like socially connected. And sometimes that really doesn't get to happen in person because we just say, you know, here we are at rehearsal, like we're the tenors, we're sitting by each other and we sing the same part, and then we leave and we just walk right out the building and we maybe say a few words together to each other, but we don't really dive in. And I feel like I know all of them really well. And I think that's been a positive of this experience, that I hope that we can bring this kind of student-centered ideas into even when we go back into person, because I've really liked being a part of the process, and I can tell that the other students, the other people in my section have really liked that too. So I think that that's an important part moving forward.
Well, thank you to everybody. I know we're rushing like crazy. I'm reading. Yes, somebody just said, wonderful students. You have no idea. I do want to say to everybody that, you know, as I read on the internet, you know, we're going through this move to the Ryder campus, and I too went through it. And as you can see, anybody that knows me, if this looks like my office in Princeton, it's on purpose because I had to make it like my office to help my brain. But the reality of it is that the reality of any choir, and especially Westminster, is it never was about the buildings, for God's sake. If you're ever on the Princeton campus, it's beautiful, but it was never about the great facilities. It was always about these incredible people and my incredible colleagues. And I just wanted everybody to know how hard we're working here and how this community is making it through this, hopefully with some ideas that I really wanted to share with all of you. The pedagogical stuff, at the back of the handout, this book is essential. If you want to understand anything about everything that we've talked about, vowel postures, etc., the solfege method, it's all in here. There's the anatomy of tone, which is on the book. I feel like I'm a book salesman. And the DVD that goes with this is online content. It's downloadable. There's a yoga class. There's all this information about breathing. I think it's all important. So, Alec, back to you, my friend. Here we go.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks, everyone, all the different panelists. We will send a follow-up email so all the panelists, if there's any resources, any PDFs you want, just email them to me. We'll collect everything together and probably tomorrow send everybody a link to download all of these resources. Incredible information. It's incredibly inspiring in this era of everyone trying to figure out how to make this work, to hear that there are good nuggets that will come through and help us post-pandemic. It's the inspiration I think we're all looking for. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate all your gifts, all your energy, all your insights. And thank you again, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you for everybody who came tonight. How gratifying. So good night, bye, or good morning, Miggy. See you all. Bye-bye.